It is March 1st. It is 1:30. I have a migraine, and it is time to begin Mega Dungeon March. What's up, boys and girls, fish and tables, and all the other whatever you are? As it is I, your grumpy guide to all things gaming, the toxic gatekeeper, the OG GM, with another OG GM adventure. And today's adventure, of course, is it's March. And for the third year in a row, we are going to attempt to build a mega dungeon and discuss the ecology of these bizarre structures. So let's begin with the very simple premise. What is the difference between a dungeon and a mega dungeon? Well, obviously, size. Dungeons tend to be a little bit smaller, while mega dungeons tend to be freaking huge. But that's not always true, because there are some dungeons out there that are very, very large, and some other things that are listed as mega dungeons that only have like 50 rooms or so, as opposed to, say, Underbound, which has a couple thousand. So it's not just this is a really big place with lots of rooms in it that makes up a dungeon versus a mega dungeon. The main difference, as we have gone over before, is that dungeons tend to tell a small, concise, consistent story. They have a beginning, they have a middle, they have a twist, they have an end, And while there are some dungeons you can visit repeatedly, keep on the Borderlands, most dungeons are one and done. You go in, you do whatever you have to do. Maybe you have to do it in 2 or 3 sessions, but still, once you're done with the big bad at the end or have retrieved the thing or whatever, chances are you're not going back to the Temple of the High Sandwich Sorcerer. You might, but really, you're probably not. I mean, once you've cleared out White Plume Mountain, there's really no reason to go back to White Plume Mountain other than to ride the log flume. But, it tends to be a small, consistent, semi-linear story. Then once it's over, it's over. You're not really going to go back or see that place again. At least not in this campaign. The GM might reuse it in another campaign, but whatever. A mega dungeon, while also tending to be a little bit larger, tends to not tell a consistent, linear story. While there may be a beginning, a middle, a twist, and an end to your mega dungeon, getting to that end may take a longer period of time, and it may be more wiggly-wabbly as opposed to the straight line that a dungeon might be. There's a lot more empty, unused space in mega dungeons. Mega dungeons environment are more fluid as opposed to dungeon module environments, which are more static. A monster you encounter might not be there the same time when you go back. There's more flow in a mega dungeon. There are factions in mega dungeons as opposed to regular dungeons, which might not have factions. Everybody might be working together in a dungeon, but in a mega dungeon, you might have groups that are directly opposed to each other. And lots of little teeny stories going on that may or may not have to do with the central plot. Still, you kind of want your mega dungeon to tell a story, but there can be a lot of random weirdness in there too. There's a lot of empty space. There's a lot of possibility of just throwing in stuff that you've always wanted to use but never really thought of a reason for. Like, hey, I saw this thing in a movie and I really want to steal that. But that wouldn't work in the Temple of the Sandwich Shadow Lord. But it might work in my mega dungeon. So I'm just going to throw that in. And if they find it, they find it. If they don't, they don't. Another thing about mega dungeons is it's not usually done in one trip. And it can tell a multi-level story. You could have a bunch of first levelers going into the mega dungeon. You could have a bunch of 8th levelers going into the mega dungeon. You could have a bunch of 15th levelers going into the mega dungeon. And it's the same mega dungeon. Because as opposed to having sort of a consistent challenge rating that a dungeon might have, a mega dungeon can be all over the place with challenge ratings. You can have a dragon here and a bunch of one-hit die skeletons over there. And they might be working together. They might be directly opposed to each other. They might have nothing to do with each other. And depending upon what direction the players go, they could run into both. And with your first level running into the dragon, probably not a good idea. So there's that sense of flow, there's that sense of change, there's a sense of going back more than once, a sense that if you leave and come back a few years later, the mega dungeon's still going to be there and it's still going to be someplace interesting. Also, mega dungeons should be rarer than regular dungeons. I know there's some places where there have a lot of mega dungeons. Face it, this is a huge structure that just, sort of needs to stand out by itself. I mean, I don't think your game world should have more than 2, maybe 3 mega dungeons. But hell, it could be have hundreds. It's your game world. But really, anything more than 3 tends to get ridiculous. Especially if they're big mega dungeons. If we're talking 3 Undermountains on the same world, like, there's not enough space. But yeah, size is always a thing. But more importantly, again, it's that sense of fluidity. It's that sense of non-consistency. It's that sense of monsters I fought in the mega dungeon sort of have a reason to be there. And once I kill them, they're dead and something might fill that spot. So the next time I go through that room, it might be something completely different. And I might be expecting a CR2 encounter. And it turns out it's a CR15 encounter because something moved in. So that sense of chaos, that sense of never really knowing, that sense of change, the sense of what your players do to the mega dungeon actually affects the mega dungeon. We talked about this before. If you knock down all the support pillars in one section and cause a cave-in, when people go back, that cave-in should be there and it should have had an effect on the ecology and the environment of the mega dungeon. Unless, of course, caveat, you have some sort of magical cleaning service in your mega dungeon who then moves in and repairs the damage that the players do. But really, that might be a thing, but more often than not, what the players do have an effect on the mega dungeon so that when people return, the story has been changed by the player characters. Again, that non-linear, much more fluid, much more flow of a story. While you can still have a beginning, a middle, a twist, and an end, it might take longer to get to that end. There might be more paths to get to the end. There might be more than one end. And what the players do have an effect on the outcome of the dungeon because the dungeon is not static. It's constantly changing, either based upon just time, the elements, the story, the world, the effects of the player characters, the effects of NPCs. It's almost like it's a living thing. Everything affects it. Everything changes it. And whatever its initial motivations or build reason were might not be the same. So it's something to think about, besides all the how big do I want it to be and how hard do I want it to be and what kind of weird talking mushroom skeletons am I going to have in it and, but just what is the environment and the effect and all that other stuff we just talked about. So that's the beginning premiere of Mega Dungeons, and that's where we're going to start. What is the story our Mega Dungeon's going to tell? What is its location, its reason for being there, who built it, why was it built, how big is it, and what kind of story do we want it to tell? Now, the first mega dungeon we designed was the idea of a dwarven library. And it was based upon the pillars in Monument Valley, just this giant, chunk of ivory and stone sticking out in the middle of a desert that could only be reached by a tram, and it just stacks and stacks and stacks of millennium of dwarven information that had been built up in this library, and just how weird it had gotten. And the second one we tried to build last year was a sunken mining city. And the mega dungeon was actually this sunken mining city that was, being watched over by these crazy druids in their moon temple. And again, the general idea was there. So this year, what is going to be our theme? We want to go weird, or do we want to go kind of just more standard? Do we want to build something that is designed to keep something in, or designed to keep something out? What is the story we want to tell? So tune in for our next episode, and we will see what I've come up with. But those are just our starting kernels, and hopefully maybe you'll have some ideas you want to contribute. Comment down below. I'll talk to you soon, losers.